and exit planning. That's why I have like a super soft spot on my heart for people who do exit planning, who do the advisory work, because I think they're unsung heroes in a lot of ways that bringing 100%. That knowledge to the table.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Exit Is Now podcast with me, your host, Scott Snider, hanging out with John Warrillow, who I think a lot of people know, certainly inside of our exit planning community. I could tell you pre-show, I was talking to him, and it's a real honor, because whether you know it or not, as a young man entering EPI with my dad 12 years ago, you had a really big influence on my life. So thank you. I really do. I really do appreciate it. I have you have more books than 3 books though. No? Don't you have like a couple others?
There was a book before Built to Sell.
But this is like that's the trilogy right there. I would highly recommend. We're going to dive into some of that content throughout the show. I was telling you before, a pretty crazy story as I was getting prepared for our podcast and kind of brushing up on all the information. My favorite has always been Automatic Customer. I have like notes and folded pages. But I was looking for the original Built to Sell. This was the first one in the series, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And I think I honestly gifted it to one of my friends, so I didn't have my copy. And so I went over to my dad's house, and my dad is an avid reader. A lot of our SEPAs have heard and seen Dad's little library. And I said, you got to have John's book, Dad. And he says, of course. So we walk into this thing. He pulls it straight off the shelf, and a letter falls out of it like a folded piece of paper. And we're like, oh, what's that? And it says, Dear Sellability Score Advisor. And there's like something about like one of your books coming out or whatever you wanted your community to do. And for those of you that perhaps are newer SEPAs or newer followers in our exit planning community, before there was the Value Builder system, there was the sellability score.
That's right.
And Dad and I and our business partner Andy and his Aspire management company, you would put this little button on your website, the way I remember it. You put this little sellability score. That's like what's my score. The owner would click that button, get a score, and that's kind of only thing they'd get. And if you're any owner, right, you'll probably get kind of a crappy score, and you're like, well, why is that? And then you get a call from Chris Snider. What's funny is once I came into the business, it wasn't Chris anymore, it was me. So I was doing all the business development work. And I would say, sir, I'd love to match you up with one of our advisors, Chris or Andy, so we can talk about why you scored that way and where we can go. So for our old school SEPAs like 2012, 13, 14, you would have seen that sellability score, and that letter fell out of Dad's book.
Oh, that's so funny.
Isn't that funny?
That's awesome.
So, but anyways, John is the founder of the Value Builder system. For me, it goes well beyond that. As a fellow business owner and entrepreneur, he's exited actually 4 times, I believe. Mm-hmm. Has started all 4 companies, so he's a startup entrepreneur. And I think either the first or second conference you were at, the exit planning, it used to be called the Annual International Exit Planning Conference, now called the Exit Planning Summit. But nevertheless, I think John and his team at the Value Builder system, in all seriousness, have been probably the longest running Exit Planning Institute partner. So I really appreciate that too. So kind of a cool thing to kind of trailblaze this kind of profession all together. So I want to get to, and I have all kinds of stuff. I could probably have you on 4 or 5 shows, but I want to talk to him a little bit about his entrepreneurial journey. I want to talk to him about his views, a little bit about his stories with other business owners. If you watch his podcast, Built to Sell, he interviews founders of companies and their transition and exit and value creation journey. So there's a lot to talk about. But as a serial kind of entrepreneur, John, I told you I was going to ask this. I want to know about Johnny the Juice Man. That's who I want to know about. So tell that story. I think you said it was your first business.
Oh my gosh. So I think it was grade 7, grade 8. There was a guy who sold juice in the high school, in the cafeteria where I went to school. Oh, and he got out of class 20 minutes early because he had to get the juice out of the fridge and go down to. And so I saw him leave, geography class at 11:20, and I had to sit there for the last 20 minutes. And I thought, that's got to be the gig. So when he graduated, I stepped in and I marketed it as Johnny the Juice Man. And I got out of class 20 minutes early to run my little juice business. So
so that was technically your first company or your first run at it. So
exactly.
So I guess you've had 4 exits now. You wrote the book Built to Sell. So Did you always enter your companies, if you can imagine that first company that you started, were you always with the kind of end in mind, or is that something you learned over time? Did you always build your companies to sell?
Yeah, no, I learned it.
Okay.
I learned it. I think in the beginning, it was really about cash flow. I mean, I learned it from an advisor. I went into a guy named Perry Miele's office, Toronto-based advisor, and I built the company. It was quantitative market research business, $6 million in revenue. It was good business, and I wanted to sell it. And he said, I can't sell it. There's nothing to sell because you're too involved in everything.
Yeah.
And that's when I really started to really appreciate the difference between just kind of income generation and cash flow businesses and ones that are building value. And so I worked with advisors, Perry and other people, and ultimately that business was acquired by a public company, Gartner Group, and you know those guys, the New York Stock Exchange listed company. So that had a good, happy ending. But it wasn't until then that I really started to think about the difference between income generation and exit plans. That's why I have like a super soft spot on my heart for people who do exit planning, who do the advisory work, because I think they're unsung heroes in a lot of ways, that bringing 100%. That knowledge to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's literally life-changing for owners when they that mindset kind of clicks. Like if you're reading, I was just brushing up this past weekend on the art of selling your business, and what I love about that book is that it's, as an owner, somebody that is very owner mindset versus maybe an advisor mindset, it's very turnkey, right? You could read the art of selling your business as an owner and take immediate action, or start to formulate that team and take immediate action. But going back to the automatic customer, so has your 4 businesses, have they all been kind of subscription models like that? You tend to kind of lean into that, I think, kind of hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's probably no better way to grow the value of your company than creating recurring revenue, service contract revenue, et cetera. But no, the other businesses were transactional, and even the research business that I went to see Perry in, it was one of those businesses where we had to scramble at the beginning of every month trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to kind of make the revenue from next month and this month, and it was brutal, and that sort of roller coaster that the beginning of the month was brutal. And so Perry really helped me understand the subscription model. There were other benchmarks at the time. So Gartner Group had a subscription model, Yankee Group, Thomson Reuters had subscription models, and that's where we moved to. But it wasn't until I really did that we were able to get me out of some of the doing, created some tail to the revenue, and obviously boosted our value significantly as well. So
is the Value Builder system then your 5th company?
Yeah.
Right? So that you're on your 5th company, subscription model, right?
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind starting, I guess, the original sellability score? What would that been, 2013, 2012?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really serendipitous start.
Yeah.
I'd written the book Built to Sell because I want to codify some of the things I'd learned about transitioning these service-based businesses to ones that were sellable. And I put this book together, and I didn't really think there wasn't some grand business plan behind it. Right. It wasn't like to sell certain widgets or whatever. It was just because I wanted to get some of the stuff on paper. And I was living in Europe at the time, and I was getting emails from business brokers, and they were like, "Hey, I saw this tool you put on your website for the book," because to sell the book, we had this thing called sellability score, which is a little, I called it a Cosmo test, but look what kind of lover you are. You answer 10 questions, and it'll tell you and sellability score was answer a few questions, it'll tell you whether you have a sellable company. And it was just a gimmick, really, that we put together to sell more books. And I got calls from advisors, brokers, and folks saying, "Hey, we saw the questionnaire. Can we use that?" And I was like, "I guess so. Sure. I mean, as long as you point to my website, sure." It was basically. And then I'm like, "Wait a minute. There's a business model here." And I had taken a couple of years off, and I was like, I want to get back into something, and I thought, maybe there's a business in licensing tools for advisors that would help them start this conversation with owners around exit. So that's how it happened.
I just think it's such a cool story because for looking at the exit planning space today, at least looking at the EPI community today, there's 5,000 certified exit planning advisors now. And I was saying to you even in the pre-show, what I'm trying to get the EPI community overall to kind of showcase is that there's another 15,000 advisors that just interact with us every year, whether that's downloading content, reading our blogs, coming to the summit, going to webinars, interacting in chapters. But back then, when you had this idea to say, hey, is there a thing here where I could license some tools to advisors? At least the EPI community, there was like 100 people in it.
Right.
There was like 100 certified exit planning advisors. So kind of truly, in my opinion, like kind of pioneering and really taking a leap, I guess, into this space.
Yeah, I remember like, I can't remember how I met Pete Chrisman, but it was Pete Chrisman at the time. Again, this goes back to 2000, I want to say 10 or 11
yeah, that's
or
what I'm
something
saying.
like that.
It had to be.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
And it's been great partnership.
Yeah, watch
since.
it all kind of flourish, and then build into like multiple books and multiple tools and everything like that. I think it's actually been. I always get real reflective when we see guys like you that have like helped pioneer industry, because it's just had to be such a unique time when such a. To me, right now, it's easy to talk about exit planning because owners are interested more than ever, right? We had our national state of owner readiness survey, and we did that. So we did a national one in 2013 and did a national one in 2023. And well, there's a section in there there's the actual readiness, right? But then there's the education. And from an education and awareness standpoint, the owners are much more educated 10 years later than they were back when you guys were all starting the industry. Yeah. They're more receptive. They're more interested. They understand some of the concepts that you have in your book about decentralizing the owner. Like they almost kind of naturally look for that. So I think that just reflecting back, it's always an interesting time to think about it. So when did you write your other two books? So first was Built to Sell, and you wrote that why? Just because you wanted to capture some of your experiences?
Yeah. It was. You know Tom Deans?
Yeah. Tom's been on the show.
So Tom and I share the same lawyer, and when I sold my last company, my lawyer said, "You got to meet Tom. It's another client of mine." And so we had lunch in Toronto, and we were sharing stories about the journey, and he's like, "You got to get this stuff down on paper, man. Like this is good stuff." And I didn't think anything, but too much at the time, but. I left that lunch and I just kind of went up to the third floor in my home and started pecking away at a computer, and like 10 weeks later the book was born. And so I have Tom to thank for that.
Yeah. Tom's been on the show. He'll be with us at the summit.
He's great.
He'll be with us at the Exit Planning Summit. He's kind of got a similar vibe as you, honestly, too. Like when you guys speak and teach and stuff, too, I always think it's cool because Tom's the family business guy that says, don't sell your business to the next generation, which is like still today, a profound, like, whoa, what do you mean?
Right, yeah.
Like it should always be built to sell to a third party. So I always think it's inspiring. So then you went to automatic customer, and that's the second.
That's right. And that was one of the things that we did wrong, or I did wrong in Built to Sell, is I gave short shrift to, or didn't spend enough time on recurring revenue. I was focused mostly on how do you package your offer, how do you get out of doing the doing, and how do you kind of structure it so it's not dependent on you. And there was sort of like a passing reference to recurring revenue. But as we started doing more of the research for Value Builder and we started building the algorithm, it was really clear that recurring revenue was the key. Kind of major driver.
Yeah.
In many industries, it takes your evaluation from a multiple of EBITDA to a multiple of revenue. And that's a huge game changer for a lot of entrepreneurs. But most entrepreneurs think, oh yeah, recurring revenue. That's for subscription companies. That's for software companies, right? Or media companies.
Yeah,
Like it's not for a landscaping company or a trucking company or blue collar companies. And so I wanted to write the book to say and kind of to debunk that myth and say actually in virtually any industry you can create some recurring revenue.
It's an interesting book. I can tell you that. I've read it, I think, 3 times now, and we try to replicate it here at EPI in our own
You've
business.
got a ton of.
But so we naturally, to your point, though, I think in reading the automatic customer, it obviously was naturally for me, John, because we obviously have a membership base, right, which is reoccurring revenue, right? You pay us for a membership, you redeem these types of benefits, and to me, that's like to your point of. That's the easy one, right? Like, of course, it's like a gym membership, right? Like that's reoccurring revenue. You get those. It's harder in the landscaping business to think that way. But I've challenged our leadership team in reading it themselves to say, because you present like 12 models or something like that in there, what other models are we missing? And then, or can we blend together to create that reoccurring revenue model? And then in all honesty, with the 15,000 people that interact with the EPI, they're really not paying for anything, And in all honesty, in a pure business conversation, we clearly have something good going on because they like following us. They read the content. They get involved. They're passionate. But they're not buying anything from me because there's nothing to buy, really. I mean, you can come to the summit, right? You can become a certified exit planning advisor. Today, we've launched EPI Academy, which is an online, whole online academy of 2-hour to 4-hour courses. But how can I monetize and optimize that big group of people? Because it's clear that they keep coming around.
Yeah.
So which model can I blend, or which model could I use to create that reoccurring revenue model?
Well, I mean,
it's quite interesting.
Would they pay $10 a month?
I know,
for
right?
content, and so you say, well, why would I care about $10 a month? We're selling, hundreds and thousands. But the reason you care about the $10 a month is because once you have their contact information, their permission to email them, and you have their credit card on file, it makes them much more likely to buy other stuff, right? So once they subscribe, so a little flip switches in our head and says, okay, I have a relationship with them. So you come up with a new summit pricing, or you've got a new course, and all of a sudden they're more predisposed to buy that. And so I think that's one of the things a lot of entrepreneurs miss, and they say, why does HP, the printing company, have like a $20 a month subscription for ink? It's because once you subscribe to HP's ink refill service, it makes you infinitely more likely to buy the HP printer.
You're more integrated into what they're doing and what they're doing.
Yeah, so I think that's one of we call it the Trojan horse effect, but it's one of those secret little reasons to create recurring revenue in just about any business.
And so the last one and most recent, when was the Art of Selling Your Business? When was that?
2021.
Yeah, that was recent, like pandemics, in the pandemic.
Yeah.
So hunkered down during the pandemic, thinking I need to write another book, or what?
I don't remember what precipitated that. I mean, I think we thought a trilogy would be cool.
Yes.
And I built up this sort of bank of stories with entrepreneurs. So like you, I do a podcast. I worked to episode 450 or something like that. So 450 entrepreneurs I've interviewed, and basically I asked them, like, what do you wish you'd known? What do you wish you'd known about selling that you now know? And it's really just designed to teach other entrepreneurs the gotchas, the mistakes to avoid. I talk to entrepreneurs, and I'll ask, like, what resources did you tap into? Was there a book you read or a course? And the most common answer is, I talked to other entrepreneurs. Like, I went out and talked to other guys who've sold companies, right?
Totally.
And so in a little funny way, you talk to your buddy and maybe 2 or 3 other people. But what the podcast does is allow you to kind of just extend that to hundreds of different people, different experiences. So that's what, and I thought, I've got so much content here, and I personally learned a ton about the art of negotiation. And so I wanted to kind of put it in there.
I always thought your podcast was interesting because I'm like, this guy has to intake so much knowledge. What a great way to intake a bunch of knowledge. Is to just interview a bunch of owners who've done it, right? So with you as an active owner today, you're like taking nuggets along the way. How do you 100%. Find your owners for the podcast?
Well, I got to give a tip to our executive producer, Colin Morgan. His full-time job is producing the podcast. And so, we do a ton of research because, frankly, nobody really wants to come on the show and say, I sold my business for $50 million. Like, they don't want to be the target of every it's not something you go around bragging about usually, right? So we have to kind of convince them that it's a great thing for the community, and this is give back, and you don't have to share stuff you don't want to share. I mean, there's a whole thing but anyway, Colin does a bunch of research. We get some nominations.
Cool.
And we actually get some value builder advisors who nominate their customers.
Right, because you have you have your certified value builders
who also will nominate somebody. So but it's the hardest part of the business for sure is finding guests.
I can tell you, I'm like last year we produced like 25 episodes, and now I'm already like, okay, who's next, right? So I can only imagine doing what did you say, 450?
Yeah. And we just started to expand it. We've got 2 new sort of episode types. So the core of what we do is we interview entrepreneurs about their sale, right?
Yeah.
And we've also now started to add 2 different types of shows. One, we call Inside the Mind of an Acquirer. So we talk to acquirers, private equity guys and gals, and strategic advisors, and we say, like, so how do you think about this? What do you look for? What are the deal killers? What's a turnoff that an entrepreneur does? What do you think mistakes are? So that's been really popular. And then we're also doing a few, not a ton, but a few experts. So yesterday I got a chance to interview Chris Voss, the guy from Never Split the Difference.
Yeah.
And what a cool story he
Yeah.
had. If you haven't read Never Split the Difference, it's such a great negotiation book. And so we interviewed him. So anyway, it's a kind of a labor of love, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just I laugh because talking about how your original podcast has spawned like other ideas. So like here at EPI, this has gone so well, and everybody thinks it's kind of cool that we get to meet a bunch of cool people and have great conversations. That everybody else is now. Like our team at EPI is like, Scott, can we get in the studio and do like a spin-off of Exit Is Now? So we have like Exit Is Now, the original. So Josh Koza, who's is in charge of our strategic relationships, is doing a podcast called Partners and Pours. So he's going to taste a bourbon and have a partner like the Value Builder system on
Fun.
him.
I noticed I didn't get the invite to Partners. Josh.
We got to get Josh in
like
here. Like, where's the bourbon tasting, man? So yeah, he's trying to have partners come in. He's not doing it as frequently as I do, but partners come in short segments, like just a 20 or 30-minute podcast to talk about what is their value to the advisor and what value do they bring to the owner, right? So that's kind of a cool spin-off. And then we have there's two other segments for us. Is we have last year at the Exit Planning Summit, we hosted our first ever Women in Exit Planning Symposium. And we thought about bringing a Women in Exit Planning podcast to the Exit Is Now brand. And we also, and I don't know if you see this in your Value Builder group, but we have a lot of retired military folks who have left the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, whatever it might be, and have become a financial advisor or a leadership coach. And they work with a lot of owners who are trying to build companies with transition. So hearing their stories and transitioning out of military life into civilian life and now helping business owners using the skills that they learned in the military and how that all combined together, another kind of interesting podcast. But nonetheless,
that's cool.
Again, we're a year and a half into this, John. So it's I'm probably being the typical visionary, ambitious. I could see Paige already has gotten up from the table and walked away. She's I can't. She was dude, I cannot with this guy. We just slow down. So I want to get into some of those business owner stories that you talked about on the Art of Selling Your Business. I think it's in that book that when you talk about one of the Art of Selling, one of the chapters, you're actually relating it to the Built to Sell podcasts as well, the stories that you have with the owner. So I want to dive into some of those. We're going to be right back after just a quick break. Stick with us.
For business owners, by a business owner. Walking to Destiny is your essential resource for understanding what makes your business highly profitable and significant. It becomes a business owner's handbook to know how to rapidly grow value and ultimately unlock the personal wealth trapped in business. Exit Planning Institute CEO Christopher Snider demonstrates how strategic exit planning will help you achieve improvements today while positioning you to build wealth for generations. Secure your success along other value creators. Discover, prepare, and decide what your walk to destiny will ultimately be. If executed correctly, these strategies can grow a business owner's wealth by 10 times. Walking to Destiny, the second edition, the 11 actions an owner must take to rapidly grow value and unlock wealth. Get your copy today at www.walkingtodestiny.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast. So I'm hanging out with John. We're just talking about kind of his entrepreneurial journey. But one of the cool things I think about the Value Builder system and your journey is the amount of data that you collect on business owners.
Right.
Do you know how much data you've collected over the years? Do you not have any idea?
Well, we had more than 70,000 business owners complete the questionnaire.
Right.
So we slice and dice that all the time.
So between that and your kind of the Built to Sell radio podcast, you have these incredible business owner stories showcasing how they've built value, blended business, personal, financial goals, and how they've exited. And so when you look at some of those stories, the first one that came to me, and I was talking to you about this pre-show because I think it was fascinating. The thing that hit me was the story about that conference that you went to with the guy and speaking on stage. I think his last name was Watkins. And you were
Richard Watkins.
Yeah, you were like, I'm not going to go. In the book, you tell the story. I'm not going to go to that. It's in the last session or whatever. And then you ended up going because all your friends were going or something.
Yeah.
And the person on stage said one of the things business owners miss is that, and I'm going to sum it up. You could tell the story. It was that they spend too much time selling their product or service and not selling their company.
Yeah.
And you said in the book that that hit you. And when I reread that, it kind of hit me too. And I'm like, I wonder if am I selling? I wonder how I'm spending my time. So talk about that.
I mean, it goes back to MIT. I got invited to this thing called the Birthing of Giants, run by Vern Harnish, and so it was a wonderful thing. 3 years, amphitheater style seating at Endicott House on MIT's campus, and it was a bunch of entrepreneurs in the room. There were about 60 of us, and we had all these amazing speakers come in: Pat Lencioni, the five functions of a team guy, Jack Stack talking about employee ownership, and in walks this guy, Richard Watkins. And to be truthful, I had planned to skip it because he had this kind of rags to riches story, and at the time I was struggling in business and things weren't going well, and I was like, you know what? I don't really want to hear some other like victory lap, some guy, kind of
victory lap,
chest pumped out saying how wonderful he was. I just didn't have the stomach for it. But a couple of buddies were going, so I was like, I'll go. So I went, and he walks in and very confidently said, okay, hands up, how many of you are involved in selling your product or service? And like every single hand went up in the air, and like the 5-year, the grade 5 kid who's like, pick me, teacher, pick me.
Right.
Like we're all kind of like, yep, I do, like proud of that.
Yeah, of course.
Right? He's like, okay,
of course.
Put your hands down. He's like, you all got the right skills, but you're selling the wrong product. You hire salespeople to sell your product. Your job as an entrepreneur is to sell your company, to always be selling your company to the marketplace so that you're building its value over time. You're building strategic partnerships. You're out there talking about your company so that ultimately when you sell it, you're making millions when you sell your company. You make a few hundred or a few $1,000s when you sell your product. And I was kind of on the edge of my seat as he sort of scolded us. But I left that session thinking, man, like you never had that experience where you play soccer, right? You're a really good soccer player. You know what it's like the difference between kind of amateur club level soccer and when you watch, like Man U play in the Premier League. Like it was like watching a different game. I'm like, oh my God, I am thinking, I had it all figured out. I'm, chasing an EBITDA goal. And here's this guy coming in, he's playing on a different plane, like a totally different plane. And it was like one of those moments where I'm like, oh man, this is a huge epiphany for me.
Did you go back and start making changes in your business? Like, was it that impactful for you?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, the big change that it took me a long time to figure out was how do I get this business so it's not dependent on me? And as a service business owner, assets walk up and down the business elevator every night or leave, in the elevator every night. And so I had a lot of thinking to do around how to do that. Yeah,
I would say that for me, and kind of subconsciously, I guess, was like Dad and I think, have done a really good job of starting to decentralize ourselves, which has obviously given us more time back in our days, right? And so now, and coming into the EPI office, to be able to meet some of our executives here, I think so over the past 3 years, we've decentralized Dad. The challenge of the last 12 to 18 months has been to start to decentralize me and empower our executive team. And it has given me more time to do stuff like this and learn. But when I reread that, preparing for our podcast today, it did really challenge myself to think like, okay, it's 2024. How am I spending my time, right? Like, and am I doing enough to drive new partnerships, to promote Exit Planning Institute and the use? The biggest thing that we're working on now, which I think is going to be cool for 2024, maybe towards the end of 2024, is when we were sitting at that executive retreat in Key West in November, the big question that came up on the board is, what does the owner think about EPI? What does the owner think about the Certified Exit Planning Advisor? I would tell this story often and tell it to you because I just think it's fascinating. It was years ago, I was sitting watching the Snider and Kozlowski family have a huge Super Bowl party that literally goes like 50 years. Like my dad was like dating my mom when he was 15 when he was invited to the family Super Bowl party. Right. So it's like you go there 6 hours, the 4 rounds of food, polka dancing. People are doing polkas right at halftime, watching the halftime show. Big Snider Kozlowski family thing. And I'm just, kind of shooting the shit with my uncle, just drinking a beer. It's halftime. And I hear a commercial come on the TV that's talking about securing your financial future. And, Dad and I were in EPI, and so it caught my attention. I remember looking over at the TV, and on the TV, the commercial proceeded to show 3 different types of people. An older gentleman that was owning a business, a young couple with a baby in a stroller, and then another elderly couple that are clearly like in retirement, and they're talking about the security of financial future. And I was like, I wonder whose commercial. You know how Super Bowl commercials always like are zingers, like it's an underwear commercial, right? And this commercial ended and it faded, and what popped up was utilize a certified financial planner with the CFP board. So to me, it's always stuck in my head. And I said, when I get to a point, I want a commercial that says, if you're looking to 10x your wealth, if you're looking to decentralize yourself, all the things that we've been talking about on this show, utilize a certified exit planning advisor. So I think moving in that direction is critical. Another cool story that comes out of the Art of Selling Your Business book is just out of the gate in chapter 2, and it's what's driving your decision to exit. I think that's kind of a super, or I guess it's like your consideration to sell. And I think that chapter and the stories that you have there, I think is also a critical point in your kind of exit journey. Like, why am I selling? What's driving me to the decision? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's a huge part. I mean, we talk about push and pull factors. But
yes.
Yeah, so push factors are the things that are frustrating you about your company, red tape, government, employees, whatever. And we all have those things in our companies, right? And what we know, and you've done a lot of pioneering work around this in exit readiness and some of the other research that you've done, is we know a lot of entrepreneurs end up regretting their decision to sell.
I know, yeah.
And one of the reasons we know that that's the case is they're all push and no pull. And what we found is that people who have a pull factor, and a really compelling one, are much more happy with their decision to exit. What do I mean by pull? A pull factor is something you're excited to go do. Yeah. So I just did a podcast yesterday with a guy named Kieran Merchant, and he's always wanted to be a filmmaker. And so he built a company to sell, and he's now going on to start his career in filmmaking. So he had a very specific one. The story I think you're referring to in The Art of Selling Your Business is a guy named Sean Oshman. He today is the #1 most downloaded episode of Built to Sell Radio.
Wow,
and he's
really?
he's this IT guy, and it's a really unusual story. He's an IT guy. He, if you need antivirus software, or at least your computers together, he'd come and do it. VAR is how they call it, colloquially.
Yeah.
And he had this little business based in Denver, Colorado, a couple million in revenue. And he had his 39th birthday. And you might appreciate this, having just been turning 40.
Yep.
He had one of those kind of epiphany moments, like, what's it all about? And he said, here I am in landlocked Denver. I want to live on a sailboat. I've lived here long enough. I appreciate the mountains, but I want to be on water. And so he said, I want to live on a sailboat. And so he said, well, to do that, I've got this little business, a couple million in revenue. I've got to go sell it. So he hires a broker based in Denver. Guy comes in and says, yeah, we could probably get you 2 to 3 times SDE, seller's discretionary earnings, right? So Sean hums and haws and says, okay, sure, but there's only one stipulation. There's one condition, which is you got to get it to me before my 40th birthday.
All right.
Broker goes away, gets a couple offers. Sure enough, one's for 2.6 times the SDE, and Sean takes the bid, sells his company. And I interviewed him after the fact, and Value Builder is all about increasing the value of your company, and so I kind of put it to him gently. I said, Sean, like 2.6 times SDEs, it's a good, it's decent multiple for a service business, but like it's not hitting it out of the park, and I kind of put it to him, and he said, yeah, but John, you don't understand. And I said, what don't I understand? And he said, I'm doing this interview from my sailboat.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was you doing the podcast.
Yeah. Like he's on his boat, and he and his fiance at the time were, living the life that they envision. And I think there's a key lesson in that for entrepreneurs, which is, you can maximize the value of your company, you can hit it out of the park, but if you don't have something you want to go do next, you may end up regretting it. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done. And CEPAS can play a huge role here, right?
I think so.
Is being that sounding board for an entrepreneur and saying, hey, what is it you want to go do? Oh, I want to travel. Okay, let's put some meat on the bones. Like, where do you want to travel? What do you want to do when you're there? Like I want to start another business. Well, okay, what?
Yeah,
I want to get involved in charity. Okay, well, what are you going to do? And get really specific. And I think a CEPA's in a unique position to do that because they're a trusted advisor. They don't have any skin in the game. They're in a great spot to say, help me think this through. And I think that's a big component of having a happy, sort of satisfying exit.
That's a pull factor, right?
That's a pull factor.
Those are the pull factors.
You got it.
So another thing that comes up a lot for me, and I think I'd love to hear your opinion on it, is so how do you feel about the transparency of selling your business to your employees? So if I was sitting here, and you're advising me as an owner, do I tell my employee how transparent is transparent, right? Like how much are you talking about it?
Yeah, this is a tough one.
It's tough.
Yeah, because if you tell them, they will immediately start brushing up their LinkedIn profile. It's like a knee-jerk reaction, right? Which is ironic because if you think about it, most employees, maybe with the exception of finance, are never more have more leverage than in the 6 months after transition,
Yes,
right? Like
yes.
you need, if you're an acquirer, you need the employees to realize what you created. And so, but in any event, it is one of the most knee-jerk reactions employees have. And so if you tell your employees, which feels natural to want to do, because they're the ones who brought you to the dance, in many cases they feel like family members, and yet it's almost always a mistake to let employees know, because it does get out into the marketplace. It can compromise your relationship with your suppliers. It compromise your relationship with acquirers. Yeah. Acquirers feel like they have one over on you and give you more, like have more leverage on you. And so for a lot of entrepreneurs, it feels like cheating on your spouse.
Yeah,
It's like you're walking around, you've got this giant secret, and there's a duplicity to it. And so it's really hard, because it's like one of those situations where the morally right thing to do is not the strategically right thing to do. The morally right thing to do is tell your employees, right? I remember I did an interview with a woman who kind of skulked around her office for weeks with this giant secret that she had sold or was about to sell. And she got to closing day and she sold the business, and she had a big all hands meeting with her employees. And she just broke down in tears. She broke down in front of all of her employees because of the guilt that she felt. Was it the right strategic thing to do? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Was it the morally correct thing? Well, you have to be your own judge of the morality of it, but it's one of those things where what's right is also not maybe what's strategic.
Yeah, I think that another interesting thing, talking about kind of post-transition, something we don't actually talk a lot about here in the methodology that we have, the value acceleration methodology, is what happens after the exit. Like if you think about the value acceleration methodology, we go discover, prepare, and decide. Once you decide, that's where we kind of end. But we don't talk about, I thought it was interesting earlier in the podcast, you talked about your podcast and interviewing acquirers. Yeah. So now, okay, we sell that company. Now it's got to be integrated either into another company or integrated into a new financial buyer, a new person taking over. I think there's got a chapter also in the Art of Selling Your Business that talks about structuring your role post-transition. So what are you seeing out of the 70,000 business owners that you guys have? Well, I would assume, especially in larger companies, that owner is going to have to take some type of role in some type of transition period.
Sure, yeah, and again, it's funny because most owners, when I do a speech to owners, I'll do an audience participation thing, and I'll say, okay, what sport does running a company equate to in your mind? Like, what's a good analogy for, like boxing or the most common is running a marathon. Right? Like it's a slog, it's longer than you'd hoped, it's messier than you want it to be, doesn't always look glamorous, and the finish line is the exit, right? And yet what I tell entrepreneurs to remember is that for the acquirer, that's the starting line. Yeah. And that's a big mindset shift because they're wanting their value of their business to be judged on what they've done, the 42 kilometers or 26 miles they just ran, and they want to say, hey, I'm here, I'm at the finish line. And what they don't realize is for the acquirer, it's the starting line, right? So if you've got it to 5 million in revenue, right? They want to know, how do I get this to 50? Right. It's not, hey, congratulations, you got it to 5. It's like, how do I get it to 50?
What's the next step?
And that's a big headspace shift. So to your answer, the structure that a lot of acquirers use, it depends on the type of acquire, but generally, if it's a service business, we're seeing a lot of, I'm sure you see the same thing with your members, a lot of earnouts. Yes. And earnouts are used to sort of bridge the gap between what the entrepreneur wants for the company and what the acquirer is willing to pay. And it's where you put a bogey or a goal in the future, and you hire the entrepreneur to try to achieve it's at risk. So if they don't make it, they don't get the number. What's probably more common these days, and in particular in kind of manufacturing businesses and slightly larger companies, is the acquirer, in particular private equity acquirer, is asking the owner to roll equity. Yes. So the private equity group will take a majority position, 55, 60% of the business, and they'll say, hey, look, take the 40% that we're not buying, roll it into this new entity. We'll build it together. We'll latch on some other companies, and then that 40% of your equity, in theory, may go on to be worth more. And that's the pitch. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it works spectacularly well. Other times it doesn't. I did a podcast with a guy named Ryan Moran, he bit on the offer and rolled in. I think it was a $20 million business. So he rolled in 45% of his equity into a new entity, but he didn't want a participating role. And so they brought in a new CEO. The CEO didn't know what they were doing. Long story short, they had too much debt, and the 45% that he rolled went to zero. That's not necessarily hugely common.
Yeah.
Most sophisticated private equity groups know what they're doing, but it's a risk, and you're a minority shareholder in a privately held business.
You're kind of just taking the ride a little bit, right? I think that's kind of a hard shift for a business owner.
That's not the pitch of the private equity group.
No.
They'll say, hey, we want you to drive this thing. We want you to stay on as CEO or chairman of the board.
Yeah.
And we want to tap into your relationship. All the good things that are going to make it palatable for the entrepreneur. But when push comes to shove and things go sideways, they're in control. And you are not, and they will decide how and when they want to exit. And unless you've got push options, which is pretty rare in small business, excuse me, not push, put options. It's you're at their mercy. We did an interesting interview with a guy named Tyler. He sold a company called Skyloft, and this was one of these like SaaS companies that was growing like stink and had a ton of acquisition opportunities, and he had put options, which means that he chose to roll some equity, and yet he had the rights to put his remaining shares force them to acquire those shares at a predetermined price. So he had the kind of cake and eat it too idea, right? So he got the upside and covered his downside with these put options. So pretty cool story.
Yeah, I think that they are very cool stories thinking about these owners in transition. I mean, really, when you look back at your 4 exits, did you take a lesson learned out of each one of those and then pay it forward into your next company, right?
Sure.
Because as you're writing these books and creating the company that you have today, it's also got to come from direct experience. Like, man, now that I know that, I wish I did that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, for sure. I probably learned more from other entrepreneurs I've interviewed than my own experiences, but for sure. I mean, and you look back and you think about, I screwed that up and I made that mistake. And, one of the common ones is the entrepreneur will get asked, like, what do you want for the company? And there is no good answer to that question, because one of two things happens. There's 2 schools of thought, right? You can say, I'll be reasonable. Right? I want to come across as reasonable, so I'll put a relatively high number, but reasonable number.
Yeah.
Well, what you've done is effectively put a ceiling onto which you'll never sell your company for. I've interviewed a guy named Chris Jones, who built a company called Candy Banners, and he got a call from a guy named Michael Rubin, who had sold his company to PayPal, just like a huge exit.
Yeah.
And Chris thought he was going into this amazing sort of tete-a-tete, this meeting with Michael, who called him into his office, and Michael, without really exchanging pleasantries, said, "Chris, what do you want for Candy Banners?" And Chris is like, "I thought I was coming here to have a chat with an industry veteran." And he's like, "No, what do you want for it?" And he blurted out a number, and obviously Michael turned to his CFO and said, "Okay, I think we can get a deal done." Meaning, don't pay a penny more than what he just said.
Yeah, right.
The other way to do it is you kind of throw some outlandishly high number on there, so you're not going to put a ceiling, right? Yeah. The problem with that, and Chris Voss, the guy I interviewed yesterday, said the problem with that is that you can stall and basically turn off acquirers before you even romance them into what your business is.
Right.
Part of the selling of a business, there's a romance to it, right? There's a dating, there's a courting process, and if your first out of the gate, number is so outside of the realm of realistic, a lot of acquirers will just cut bait and they'll say, this guy's a lunatic, and they'll move, right? So there's just no way. I mean, I think the only way to answer it is more like, I'm a reasonable and I'm a fair person. I'd be happy to entertain anything you think is fair.
Yeah.
And just put it back on them.
Yeah. So last kind of owner story and kind of owner tips, if you will, is I thought it was fascinating. You call it the Bob Dylan effect. Is that right? The Bob Dylan effect. And I think it was one of the final chapters of the book where you talk about getting comfortable was selling your business. Talk about that, because I also think that's critical for owners listening to understand.
100%. So when most entrepreneurs start their business is like 0% of their net worth, right?
Yeah,
like
right,
at the beginning, maybe you have a little
nothing.
equity in your home, maybe you bought some Google stock, whatever, and your business is just an idea. So if you start it, I mean, it's different if you inherit a business or you take it over.
Buy.
Or if you buy. But
Yeah.
most entrepreneurs start, it's worthless when they start, right? But over time, you may find that the value of your company starts to creep up in terms of the proportion of your overall wealth. In the early days, if you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose, as the Bob Dylan song goes, right?
Yeah, right.
You're shooting for the fences. Like, you got an idea, like we were talking before we hit record, we were talking about like the events business. You and Josh are like, you know how to run an event? I don't know how to run an event.
I hope you do.
But like, we'll just wing it and we'll make it happen, right?
Right.
But now you build something, right? Now you've got EPIs, there's thousands
Yeah,
of people,
yeah.
there's 15,000 this and
Yeah,
5,000 that. I mean, it's a big thing,
Yes.
right? So now you're like, actually, we kind of need to know how to run an event, right? And maybe we need insurance, and maybe we need a marketing plan. Like,
it becomes a whole complexity, right? It's a whole thing.
And so we become more risk averse as the business grows in a funny way, right? Because in the early days, if you ain't got nothing, there's nothing to lose. And so as we grow, as the business becomes a bigger and bigger proportion of your wealth, and if you've got a good SEPA who says, hey, Scott, you should look at your overall wealth picture here. And when we first started working together, your house made up 80% of your net worth.
Right.
Now your business makes up 93% of your net worth.
It's going to be harder to get out of.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, but it also begs the question, like, how are you thinking about diversity? Because we all diversify our stock portfolios, but most entrepreneurs don't, right? So they get this giant, net worth statement, which 90% of it's their business, and they get really risk averse, right? And we talked again before we hit record. It's like, if a business isn't growing, it's dying.
Yes.
Right. And so if you're just there to kind of be the custodian and make sure that the thing just keeps, trust me, it's dying. Right.
Yeah.
So you've got to be the energy, the spark plug to go to the next level. And if your wealth is almost all tied to your business, you become really risk averse. And so that's a case for, now I'm making the private equity guys case for them. It's a case for diversifying, selling a bit, maybe a minority recap or a majority recap, so that you kind of put some money in your jeans. You've got some diversity to your wealth, but you still, you can still shoot for the fences at that point.
I agree. Yeah. I think one of the things that came out of 2023 was the both from advisors and owners, their interest in these hybrid exits. So to your point, okay, I own 100% now. I'm 55 years old. Maybe I'll sell 10% to my employees. Then maybe I'll sell another 15% to a private equity group, or take a minority position or whatever it might be. But you're taking chips off the table. If you're talking to Sean Hutchinson, who's a longtime SEPA as well, he talks about the Pac-Man eating your wealth. So as you're growing your business, it's becoming a bigger part of your net worth, and it's just crushing the other one, just becoming more risky. So if you're not taking some chips off the table along the way and reinvesting that into other asset classes, you are actually just creating a bigger risk for yourself along the way. But I always thought that was interesting. We're due for a break, so I want to take a quick break. We've been talking about owners, and I want to flip it, and I want to talk a little bit with you about the advisors and kind of where we're all going. As from somebody that has entered this space when there was like 100 SEPAs, over the last 10 years, where have we've gone to here, where we're going to go next. So give me a quick couple minutes. We'll be right back.
The Exit Planning Institute is the authority in exit planning. With its award-winning process, the Value Acceleration methodology provides deep insights into how to help business owners create more significant companies while blending and aligning their business, personal, and financial goals. EPI brings together the world's most elite exit planning advisors to form the EPI community. The EPI community represents over 15,000 professional advisors worldwide, including its 5,000 certified exit planning advisors. These advisors include financial advisors, growth consultants, CPAs, attorneys, M&A advisors, amongst others, who come together to expand their knowledge, create and innovate, network and relationship build, grow their practices, and better attract and engage business owner clients. Join EPI today and gain access to the community, content, courses, credential, and conference that you as the professional advisor need in order to harness the opportunity with small to lower middle market business owners who strive to grow a company of significance, thus having a highly valuable and transferable company. Follow the Exit Planning Institute on LinkedIn and visit earnsepa.com to learn more about the community leading the exit planning profession.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast. So we've been talking about owners. I want to talk a little bit about the advisors and kind of the role we play. I mentioned to you earlier on the show, John, that I think that the market is changing, that the advisors today, it's kind of a cool time to be an exit planner, because I think when my dad became an exit planner in 2008, the biggest hurdle we had at Aspire Management is everybody was like, well, what the hell is a SEPA? Why do I need exit planning? I'm a 50-year-old owner. I don't plan on exiting for 15 years. So the hurdle was the education and awareness level, right? Like your business development plan really started with just simply educating the owner, because you had a group of owners, you had an audience that you were selling into that really didn't really know what you were really selling. Today, and we've had the National State of Owner Readiness Survey from 2023. We'll see that report come out shortly. That owners are more educated than they've ever been. So, in working with the Value Builder system now, where have you seen the profession kind of evolve? What are some of the big kind of notable things for you? And where do you think we're going over the next 10 years with a younger generation of owners coming up that seemingly is a little bit more in tune, and maybe even searching for somebody like a SEPA to help them balance and blend and decentralize and do a lot of the things that you were talking about in your books as well? Where do you see some of those maybe advisor struggles as we move into the future?
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing, by the way.
Yeah.
In some of our research, we're seeing that the market, in other words, business owners, are much more inclined to kind of build to sell. I mentioned that guy, Kieran Merchant. He started a company with the view to sell it because he wanted to be a filmmaker. 18 months later, he sold it. And there was no sort of like 10-year journey. There was no, it was almost mercenary in his approach. I think that's becoming more common, and I do think it's a generational thing to some extent. I think younger entrepreneurs are more likely to build to sell, whereas the older generation are a little bit more patriarchal, a little bit more like maybe pass it down to kids. So I think that's one trend we're definitely seeing. And I think among advisors, they're starting to see it as well. It's funny, at Value Builder, one of the reasons we changed the branding from sellability score to Value Builder score, this goes back years ago, is we had a lot of advisors say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about selling. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want them to sell. Right? I'm allergic to that." Or entrepreneurs are. And so we rebranded Value Builder because Value Builder was more palatable, right? Everybody can want to build the value of your company, right? Whether you want to sell it or not. Yet, what we've actually got some research. Sam's going to kill me for sharing this data point with you, but coming out in 2024 at our event for our advisors, we're going to share some research. And one of the interesting data points is that once a business owner makes the decision to sell, their investment in outside advisory services goes up by 50%.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it would make sense.
Makes sense, right?
It would make sense.
But we've just finally quantitatively, measured at 600 business owners we surveyed through the Built to Sell universe, and they say that those that had made the decision that they're within 2 years of selling, their expenditure on outside advice, SEPAs, brokers, financial advisors, kind of skyrockets. So I think the advisor community is really glomming on to this idea that there's a lot of money to be made. For me, I always thought of kind of business coaching. I'm embarrassed to say this now because our business is based on licensing our tool coaches. But at the time, I kind of thought I was kind of the lone wolf guy, right? Kind of, I know best. I can do it on my own or whatever. Right up until the time that I decided to sell. And that's when I'm like, I need somebody I need some help, and I need someone who kind of knows I want to do this right this time. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to position yourself as someone who's really thoughtful about exit and and not just how to build the revenue of a company. We talk about this idea of like revenue is vanity, value is sanity. This kind of notion that there's a lot of sort of noise about revenue. There's the Inc. 5000. There's all kinds of stuff about how do I grow the top line of my company, and that's great. But we all know businesses that have a huge top line and nothing to show for it. Either they've given up a ton of equity along the way to fuel that growth, or they've just got such razor thin margins that there's really nothing of value that anyone would want to buy. Whereas we kind of subscribe to and really preach this idea of like value is sanity. If you focus on building value and value acceleration methodologies, classic example of that, that gives you much more poker hand if you want a better poker hand if you think about it that way.
Yeah, and you're a guy that's lived all over the world, right? I mean, right?
Yeah,
were you born in Canada?
I was born in England.
Born in England, okay.
Spent live in Toronto now. Spent a ton of time in the United States at my last company, and after I sold that, we spent some time in Europe. So I've spent.
So when you you get first-hand experience at different markets. It's kind of related to kind of what we're talking about now. But do you see differences in business owners
100%.
in different markets?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you see?
Well, the U.S. is very, very entrepreneurial. The most entrepreneurial market doesn't come as a huge surprise, but this idea of kind of building to sell is much more prevalent here.
Here, okay.
Yeah. In Europe, in particular, not necessarily the UK, although we can argue whether that's part of Europe or not. But if you go to, I was asked to speak to a group in Italy about the automatic customer, and they're like, just don't talk about selling. I'm like, what are you talking? Like, that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, that's my whole gig here.
Yeah. Come on, man, throw me a bone. They're like, yeah, but that's not the way business works in Italy. We pass our business down.
That's very interesting.
And Italy is very much this kind of patriarchal society where businesses get passed down one generation to the next. Now, obviously, there is a younger generation that's starting to kind of evolve their thinking in that regard. But yeah, we see a huge difference. The U.S. is very entrepreneurial, much more likely to build to sell.
Yeah, that's interesting. We used to do a lot of work with the Cox Family Enterprise Center, which was at Kennesaw State University in Georgia.
Sure. Yeah.
And I forget the lady's name now, but she was the executive director. This is pre-COVID. And she was Italian. And she came in to talk to me and my dad about these differences in family cultures in business. And it's funny is that she's like, we always talk about in the United States how basically by the third or fourth generation, the business has gone down and eventually fizzles, where you'll go to a company, and a family-owned company in Italy, they'll be in their 8th generation, right? It's bad and good, right? The bad part is, and it's kind of what Tom Deans talks about, this forced intergenerational. You just feel an obligation that's what you do. I do think studying family companies across the world is different, a lot different than our kind of American attitude to.
Will you pass on EPI to Jet?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, I think we're more built to sell. I think, I think that if he's asked, right? So he does. Really? He goes, I want to buy your business one day, Dad. And I'm like, I don't know if we'll be here, dude. Like, you're 9. I don't know. I don't know yet, right? Or I don't know how much of it I would own, right? So some of the things that we're talking about today in decentralizing Dad is we've had folks from our executive team express interest in taking equity in the company.
Sure.
So maybe it'll be around, but I don't know what my involvement might be at that point. Maybe I'm just a minority owner that has it as a strategic investment in my overall financial portfolio. But it's interesting to be in that position kind of at a younger age to think about a built-to-sell kind of company. Right. And again, probably another show to talk about, but timing the exit, right? I don't think you're not a fan of trying to time it, right?
I'm not.
Right?
No.
You're not a fan of that. And so, and in we teach in the CEPA program, right, that you can't really time it up. So, but it's always an interesting question because the kids, as they get older, they understand now what I do and my kind of come from of always. Have you ever worked for anybody?
Oh, for very short
time, right?
Yeah,
I was a janitor for 2 weeks, and that was my only job, really? Right? And that I was like 15.
Yeah.
And so they know me as a business owner. So I don't know. I think that I would love to own a business with my kids. It might not be this business though, but I think that if they have that entrepreneurial spirit, I just think that we don't have that Italian culture, man. I'm about as Midwest American made as you possibly can be.
Built to sell,
I don't know
baby.
if I'm built to sell. I don't know if I'm built for 9 generations, right?
Yeah.
So, kind of last question as we wind down here. So, So Value Builder System has taken the ride through the 10 years too. So what's the future for you guys, and kind of what role do you, Sam, and the team at Value Builder see you guys playing as our profession becomes even more prominent than ever before?
Yeah, I mean, immediate future, we're going to release this research in February of next year. Yep. We're going to talk about how being a value builder advisor and actually licensing the system and offering value building advice. I think the average increase in fees is 72%. So we're gonna really lean into that data point, because again, once an advisor sort of says, look, I can help you build the value of your company, the entrepreneur immediately sees the ROI. Right? They're like, okay, this is my largest asset. If I move the needle by 10%, it has a huge impact.
Right.
And so we're going to release that in the short term, and that's really the more of the same. I think we've got a few. I mean, we've got a ton. We got a long product roadmap of features. We're going to redo all of our assessments. We're leaning into. We've got 3 kind of major assessments. One's called Valuability. There's called Pre-Score. There's called Freedom Score. So
really embraces the 3 legs of the stool. Like, it's probably designed by intention, right?
Yeah, no,
but
100%.
For the certified exit planning advisors, or anybody that has read my dad's book, and he talks about these 3 legs, which is a core organizing principle for everything value acceleration. What I loved is what Sam was showing me and the team here at EPI is those 3 scores. And they literally directly, financially ready, personally ready, business ready, all 3 scores can kind of show the owner where they lack and where they're good at, and where that kind of incremental value is driven too, because in your system, you can kind of show how the score moves. Yeah. It's like a quick little tick of the dial. Like, I can do these things, and it creates $100,000 of value, or that's a $500,000 value driver. So that's pretty cool too, seeing that in your tool.
Yeah. So I think we're most well known for the Value Builder score.
Yes.
I think fewer people know about Pre-Score and Freedom Score, and together they kind of make this, to your point, the 3 legs of the stool. Yeah. So I think we'll lean into that. We might bundle that together into an assessment of some sort that looks at all 3 lenses. So lots to come on the product roadmap.
Well, John, I appreciate you coming all the way from Toronto into Cleveland. I think you drove, right?
Me.
You said
I
you
did.
drove. Yeah, made the drive down. So I appreciate that. And we will see, for all of you looking to attend the Exit Planning Summit, Value Builder System is always there, longtime partner. So you'll see Sam and the gang over there in Marco Island, Florida in April. So with that, John, thanks for coming on and hanging out. It's a little intimidating, I have to say, from the guy that has 450 episodes versus the guys that got 25. So we'll have a drink or something after this and talk about how we did. For our listeners, our next show is on February 14th, so Valentine's Day. So make sure you're hanging out on Valentine's Day with the Exit Is Now podcast and me. Subscribe, listen, and leave a review on all of the podcast platforms. I appreciate your time. We'll see you soon, guys. Thanks.